literacy. First, we have Dr. Kimiana Burke, who is with us, and Mr. Kareem Weaver. Truly, we are grateful you're here, not only today, but are sharing your gifts with us multiple days this week. I'll let Dr. Wright talk a little bit more of that. So let me go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Wright, leading our next agenda item and formally introducing our guests. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And yeah, this is a delight to have friends and new friends joining us for this very important topic. But I want to start by recognizing some folks in the audience too. And Chi Kim is here. She is the CEO of the IBIS Group. And for those of you that may not remember, we were blessed to receive $6.8 million from her foundation for all teachers and leaders and paraeducators and higher ed teachers to take a course in the science of reading. It is free to them. It is self-paced. And it also counts toward their certification. So I really want to say thank you to Chi, because this really made this possible. And we have in the audience representatives from SUNY New Paltz, which is Rose Else Mitchell. Thank you, Rose. And the co-founders of the AIM Institute are with us as well, Pat Roberts and Nancy Blair. So thank you for being here as well. And their newly appointed, is it deputy, I want to say? Say it again. Head of, excuse me, don't, my apologies, my dear friend. So this young woman that's here is another one of Mississippi's finest, and AIM reached out and hired her to head up their work. So she was with us in Mississippi, and we are so happy to see Kristen Wynn here. So it's delightful. And Kimiana, I'm going to introduce her too, but another one of Mississippi's finest who's now leading this work as well. And we have our own Dr. Tanette Smith. So you've got a lot of Mississippi folks that know an awful lot about the science of reading. But I wanted to recognize everybody who was in the audience, and so thank you all for being here. It is an honor to present the Right to Read documentary. This documentary stars to discuss why the literacy policy and its implementation is so important, not only to Maryland, but to the nation. The Right to Read shares the stories of an NAACP activist, a teacher, and two American families who fight to provide our youngest generation with the most foundational indicator of lifelong success, the ability to read. Experts throughout the film also discuss the current state of literacy in the United States and the importance of implementing the science of reading in classroom instruction nationwide. Today, we're going to watch the first 8 minutes of the film to ground us all in the importance of literacy access for all, and we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Kimiana Burke and Kareem Weaver, both of whom are heavily featured in the documentary, and you will hear from them. Dr. Burke is now a senior policy fellow at Excel in Ed, where she is assisting state leaders in building new or improving existing K-3 reading policies with a focus on supporting successful policy implementation. I had the absolute pleasure of working with Dr. Burke in Mississippi as we laid the groundwork for the state's comprehensive literacy reform that has actually become a national model for how to prepare educators to teach reading effectively so that all children can learn to read. Kareem Weaver is the lead character in The Right to Read and the co-founder of the literacy nonprofit Fulcrum, which focuses on literacy, improving literacy rates in California as well as across the country. He is an award-winning educator, leader, and activist, and is the chair of the Oakland NAACP Education Committee. Kareem is also the producer of this film. So we're going to watch the first clip of the film this morning, and then both Mr. Weaver and Dr. Burke will share their own perspective on this issue. The call to action, as you will see in The Right to Read, is for all of us to be accountable, to increase access to effective literacy instruction in classrooms and pragmatic solutions for families at home.
Ready? Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream.
I did everything I could to put my kids in the best position to be successful.
Good, very good.
I love it.
I got black kids. They can't afford to be illiterate. I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure they get every possible opportunity. And as a teacher, I always try to do the same thing for the kids in my classroom.
Joyful. We already found the sounds. We said,
Literacy is our greatest civil right. If you can't read, you can't access anything in our society.
We got breakfast in the oven.
So it's already an uphill climb. If you can't read, it's like putting a gorilla on your back.
Definitely swimming upstream.
Yeah. So I'm actually trying to convince people to actually teach kids how to read.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
I know.
What is the point of learning how to read? Convince me.
Imagine being in the Stone Age and you ain't got no stone. Imagine being in the Bronze Age, you ain't got no bronze. All right, we in the information age right now. You can't read the information.
Millions of American kids struggle to read.
Americans need universal access to quality education.
Every child must start school ready to learn.
We should succeed in seeing that every 8-year-old can read independently.
We need to prepare our children to read and succeed in school so that no child is left behind.
But the way that children are usually taught how to read does not line up with decades of evidence on how they actually learn to read.
Let's give our kids that chance.
The greatest equalizer in the world is education.
I have taught every grade level. Taught high school, middle school, elementary school, and there are a few through lines, one of which is the kids can't read. California, arguably the most progressive state in the union. Social justice minded. But when I first started teaching in Oakland, there were only 2 kids in my class of 35 who could read.
Larry, say what's up to the camera, Larry. What's up? All right, now, Larry, take it from the top. What does that say?
Larry ran to the cat.
My man Larry. I'm gonna say this right now on tape. My man Larry just read his first sentence by himself, and I'm very, very proud of him. And whoever sees this videotape, I'm hoping I can get his mother to see it too. I want them to know that Larry can read. And Larry will read, won't you?
Yeah.
Right on.
The question is, what becomes of those kids who don't have a foundation in reading? I can tell you what happens to them. Now, Lord works in mysterious ways. Kids, can overcome all kinds of challenges. However, illiteracy is the pipeline to prison. It's also the pipeline to homelessness. It's the pipeline to unemployment and depression. And there are publishing companies that sell popular curriculum that do not teach our children to read, making millions of dollars. From the day I set foot in Oakland, I realized that everything starts with literacy. Everything starts with reading. Science, math, history, you name it. If you can't read, you can't access anything else.
Reading is the basis upon which all other academic learning is built. So reading is basically going to determine so many things about how the rest of your school career goes. We have a lot of people who struggle to read. And it's kind of amazing if you look at just the basic data, like why aren't we screaming and yelling about this?
There is one test that is given across all of America called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. It's the only test that we have that is given consistently across the nation. We've been giving it for decades, and what it shows is, unfortunately, mostly unchanged. We are failing about 2/3 of our children. NAEP is not a perfect test, but NAEP is telling us something essential. The data reveal a truth that we cannot ignore.
So let's just take a look at the idea of just basic. Who can read at a basic level? Well, we are in a situation where like 1/3 of our 4th graders cannot even read at a basic level. That is a lot of kids. And it is even worse, way more shocking, if you look at kids of color. Nearly half of kids of color in 4th grade cannot read at a basic level.
And then I'm wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Maybe it's my family. Maybe I'm too poor. Maybe I'm too black, too brown. Maybe it's because I speak a different language. Maybe because they went through too much. There's too much trauma. Maybe it's me. Parents have no idea.
The root of the problem is that children are being taught in a way that is not working.
If it was a minority issue, then all these soccer moms wouldn't be spending $20,000, $30,000 to send their kids to private tutoring because they didn't learn how to read in school.
Kids of all races are struggling to read. The issue is who has the resources to deal with it.
So what we have in this country are a lot of well-to-do kids who are getting the help they need, and what happens is we just don't see, in some ways, the problem with the instruction because of that.
I'm going to turn this over to our guests. Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Dr. Wright, and hello to you all. Good morning. Good to see you today. Every time I see that opening, it kind of takes me back a little bit. I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk to you this morning. I look forward to the screening we'll have tomorrow. And I just have a few minutes to share a couple of things with you about this and related to your plan and literacy in general before I turn it over to Dr. Burke. The first thing is, you know, when we started with the NAACP in Oakland, we just decided to study success because we found that a lot of people talk about these kinds of things, but very few have actually seen something work. And so what we have are theorists who have ideas and beliefs and politics and all the rest, but when you say, well, have you seen it before? They're like, well, no, but I read here or I read there. And so we just spent time studying what works around the country. In fact, there's an organization called EdTrust, and they had there was a podcast, they had several seasons, I think 5 or 6 seasons, and they went around the country, urban districts, rural districts, you name it, and they looked at ones where students were reading far above what they were expected to based on demographics and all the rest. Who was actually outside of the curve, so to speak? And I was stunned. First of all, we studied it thoroughly. And I was stunned to see, you know, these conversations with superintendents and state board members and local districts and principals and you name it. And some of these episodes would have 5 views, 15 views, after years. And I realized there is a deficit of expertise and knowledge. And it seems as though, as a public, we just haven't had the appetite for the details of success. And that was a hard truth to hold, but I've come to reckon with that. So when we built our coalition, we organized around the very things that they had discovered in the series and some other research that we had done. And we identified about 50 things that needed to happen. And we said, we can't do 50 things. So a lot of compromise and negotiation. We whittled it down to 8. We came up with 8 actions that systems need to have to get this right, to improve outcomes for kids. And I looked at your comprehensive plan, the proposal that's on the table, and there were 6 of those 8. Usually these plans have 1 or 2 at most. So I won't say stunned. I guess I should have known. I should have known. And then the other ones were, university work and things like that. And I said, okay, this is legit. This is legit. They're on the right road. And so that was very, very encouraging. The second thing I wanted to mention before I turn over to Dr. Burke is that I'm not representing NAACP today. When I'm back at home, sometimes I do, but today I'm not. But recently, at the national convention, where all the delegates from around the country come and they sort out certain civil rights issues, the president of the organization, Derek Johnson, put forward a couple of resolutions, and they were passed by the national delegates around evidence-based instruction that covers basically the things you all are talking about today. The reason I'm saying that is because this isn't just an education issue, this is a civil rights issue. Kids have a right to learn how to read, and there is a way to do it. It's been proven. And on that wise, we recently, in February, we brought the state president of Maryland's NAACP, Reverend Kobe Little, and about 40 other folks from around the country, folks from departments of ed in different states and districts and superintendents and you name it. We brought them to a district in your neighboring state, in Delaware, where a district had gone from the lowest in reading for 4th grade to the highest in the state. It was discovered in that podcast. I said, we got to go see it. And when we brought Reverend Little to see that, he was stunned just as much as we were. And it wasn't overnight. I mean, as you mentioned, it took some years. And this is a district with all the, all the risk factors and the demographic challenges and, a lot of second language learners coming in usually from Haiti and the Dominican Republic, so they speak French as well as Spanish, and kids with dyslexia, and just all these different things. But they had figured some things out. They had been doing 7 of the 8 things. So it is possible. I've seen it. And so it is encouraging to me, and I just wanted to tell you this morning that we have to elevate examples of success and avoid the political maelstrom that inevitably comes up with different aspects of these types of things, because some of them will be controversial. But understand, we as a public, this is new to us, and success and change is hard. I have a daughter who's at Bowie State University. She's a sophomore. And so I have, and more than likely she'll settle here because she doesn't want to come home now. So I have a vested interest in making sure we get this right, just like all the other residents of the state. It is possible. I commend you for having a comprehensive literacy plan that aligns with the research consensus and that aligns with what students need and deserve as a civil right. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Burke.
Good morning, everyone. I guess I'll turn this on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to come and to speak before you today. I am Kimiana Burke, and this begins my 26th year in education. Yes, I started when I was 12. Like many of you, my career in education looks a bit different, right? In different times of my life along this journey. I've been a teacher in elementary, middle, and high school. I've also served as a literacy coach, a district administrator, and university staff as well. In 2013, Mississippi, under an education reform-minded governor, decided to go big or go home. As many of you know, hopefully no one in this room would say, thank God for Mississippi. If you're familiar with that term means that no matter how bad other states were doing on national assessments, they could always count on Mississippi to be the worst state in the nation. So in 2013, I was selected to lead this effort with an amazing team and under the leadership of Dr. Wright And I'll say this. I believe that literacy policy is an equity policy, and so I'll just level set for that. But I also think for Mississippi, a state that had historically been last in education, the poorest blackest state in the nation, that there was a lot of anxiety around this level of accountability, and not the big A, like accountability and assessments, but accountability for everyone involved, especially for the adults. This was the first time when we began the requirement for universal screening in kindergarten, first and second grade, right, and also through third grade, that there was this level of accountability in K-2 for them to move children forward, to essentially hand this child over to the next teacher to say, I've gotten him or her ready for you, and to be held accountable for that through growth, right? So for our comprehensive policy, this was our way to level set, to establish a common language across our state as to how to teach children how to read. And what we found is that a lot of students are struggling to read not because of ability, but because of a lack of access and opportunity. So over the years, when we started seeing some growth, especially on our national assessment, I don't think the country noticed, right? Within our state, we were, like, yay. Dr. Wright would always say, well, we're headed in the right direction. We were at a scale score of 209 in 2013 when we started. And you saw in the film, they mentioned NAEP, the National Assessment, the only assessment in the country where states are allowed to be compared in certain grade levels and content areas. And we were just kind of moving in the right direction. But in 2019, after 6 years of full-on implementation of our Literacy-Based Promotion Act, Mississippi reached the national scale score average for the first time in history. We tied with that average. What was very unique about that is that Mississippi was the only state in the nation to have what was considered statistically significant growth. And then the calls started coming. What are y'all doing in Mississippi, right? With the model policy that has been proposed here through this actual avenue, this is really kind of unprecedented. In my role now, I serve as Senior Policy Fellow for Early Literacy at the Foundation for Excellence in Education. It's a policy advocacy organization focused on student-centered policies. And I wear two hats. The first one is to work with policymakers who are championing early literacy, and so I testify in education committees and those things. And then the second is to support state departments of education as they are implementing these laws. But for the first time, I see an initiative that seeks to gain public comment. I was like, man, that's bold. Right? Because at the end of the day, I've talked to so many people across the country. Currently, my team and I work with 36 states in DC. And for all of the state board members I've spoken to, the advocacy organizations, many of them had the sentiment that they feel as if the policy is happening to them and not with them in mind. And with this approach, this has everyone in mind, looking to see how to strengthen, looking to see like what are some of the things that maybe we missed, how can we make this better, how can we be more inclusive. So I want to kind of end my portion with the image on your screen. So what you see here is Maryland's 2022 fourth grade reading state snapshot report from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Maryland's data trend, you're looking at the graph that's the middle to the right, on the right-hand side of the page. Maryland's data trend is in like this orange color, and the nation or public is in black. It looks at over 3 decades of data, starting with 1998. Maryland's scale score in fourth grade reading in 1998 was 212. Over the years, there were gains. I love looking at these types of data trends because, you know, for those of you who are Marylanders and actually know kind of the history of what was going on in education, you can probably look to some of those years and say, okay, during this time we were doing this. Like everyone was on the same accord. And this was happening and it was actually showing up in student outcomes. Before the pandemic in 2019, Maryland's scale score was 220. Post-pandemic 2022, Maryland's scale score in fourth grade reading, which was the last assessment for which we have data. The results for this year's assessment will be out, I believe, next year. Maryland's fourth grade scores dropped 8 points, 8 skill score points. In NAEP language, 10 skill score points are equivalent to 1 grade level. So Maryland's fourth graders in 2022 scored almost 1 grade level below the students in 2019. But I think that I'll leave you with this because I want to make sure that everyone understands this sense of urgency, not just around policy itself, but around doing something. Earlier, you all mentioned some things about, I mean, we're already screening, right? Like we're already doing professional development, right? But these efforts in silos are not going to make for this comprehensive, all hands on deck approach. And I'll leave you with this before we open it up for questions. Maryland's fourth grade scores in 2022 had an average scale score of 212. Maryland's students have not scored that level since 1998, 26 years ago. So this is our sense of urgency. This provides the context for the conversation moving forward about adopting a comprehensive approach to improving reading outcomes for Maryland students. Thank you.
And we're open to any questions our guests are.
Thank you for this, I'll say, sobering presentation. We've been talking about this. The board has been deeply engaged in this matter for some time. But this presentation only has the effect of focusing us even more and reminding us why we're doing this work. I'll open it up to board members this time. Mr. Greer first.
Thank you so much. I'll echo what Dr. Michael said, sobering for sure, and also powerful. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing us unfold what's going to be the strongest literacy plan in the country. You mentioned 8 factors that you all found over the years. We've got 6 of them. I think this board likely knows and could list what they are, but I'd love for the sake of the people who are watching and everybody who's watching this are just paying attention to this meeting now to know what they are and which of the 2 that we're missing.
Glad you asked. Glad you asked. So, first of all, the ones that are missing, so there's a piece around higher ed that that's a tough group to wrangle. We were just speaking with some folks from the higher ed community because that's the source of teacher talent. And if they're not aligned with best practices and what research says is going to help get all kids reading, then all the efforts you're doing, you're going to have to repeat when the next wave of educators comes through that was trained. And so that's a piece that has to really be there. But as I had an opportunity to engage with some folks from higher ed yesterday, alongside your superintendent, it seems like that's happening. But that was one piece. The other piece that, so there's a piece around so understand it was a coalition. So we don't all agree on the same things, but you have to make compromises. And there was a piece around cultural responsiveness that within our group was a heated debate and conversation and whatnot, but it was one of the 8, so I had to name it. And there's always some issues around where that sits and where it should sit. Where we finally landed was we realized everyone wants their kids to read. And I, as an African American man, I want to make sure that when I take my children to the library, they can read anything they want to. We can read about heroes and heroines and related to our culture, et cetera. But what I need the schools to do is to make sure that the skill is developed so that when we get to the library, we can do everything. And that's the same in the Latino community, the bilingual folks. It's the same in folks around the political spectrum, et cetera. But some good things that you do have there. So one of the main things is access to high quality instructional materials. I see that list is coming. You know, I would just urge, and that's probably one of the biggest ones, is that you have to make sure that materials are usable and that they have evidence of success. Now, you may nod and say, well, of course, but I can tell you that's not the norm. In fact, publishers have told me, Kareem, they don't really ask for that. So why would we limit ourselves by declaring what is or isn't true when they don't even ask for that? You got to ask for that. What's the evidence? In CPR, they're actually using the curriculum that has the best evidence of student achievement across all subgroups, and it's yellow on ed reports. Their algorithm does not include student achievement in any way. But they actually did their research to find what actually works for kids across all demographics. And that's got to be aligned to the structures they have in place. Another one is safety nets. So while the teachers are figuring it out, and the principals and the coaches, et cetera, there has to be some sort of a safety net underneath them so the kids aren't falling through the cracks. And they're not all created equal. What we found is that some safety nets happen after school, but the best ones are during school. And they have the results to back it up. We say it's best to happen in school because that's where you get all the kids, right? After school, now you're just hoping that people show up, and that's another one. There are others. I don't know if you want the whole list, but there are some common sense things, and then there are some technical things. For another one, for example, is there has to be, and this is at the district level and the state level, there has to be someone in charge of early literacy that is empowered to do what needs to be done. Usually the superintendent's cabinet, whether it's at the district or the state, has someone who's in charge of everything, you know, reading and this and this and that. But what we found is that, based on what's worked around the country, is those systems that are successful are organized in a way where this is elevated to the top. So when the superintendent meets with the cabinet, they're in the room, and they can speak on behalf of this initiative and this plan. They can speak to the progress, et cetera. So those are a few. And what I will do is I will email you the full list, Dr. Wright, so that you can share with the board. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Ms. McCusker.
Thank you. And the chart is now gone, but the chart that you showed us, I wanted, I don't know if they can bring it up, because I wanted to blow it up a little bit, because I wanted to see where that giant dip, what year that giant dip happened. Because that downward trajectory
from 2013
started with a really steep drop, not a slow drop over time. And I was wondering where that was, because I would like to look back and see what was going on with literacy instruction in the state of Maryland. What is that year?
15? The administration of 2015. Yes. 2015. So from 2013 to 2015.
Something shifted big time between 13 and 15.
Mm-hmm.
So
there was about a 9-point.
Let me jump in here on this. So I want to be as transparent as possible. We ran through this in 2013 and 15. The biggest dip on here has to do with the change in eligibility of who participated in taking NAEP in terms of who was exempted. You know, we had a misalignment in terms of accommodation. So NAEP does not have, you cannot have NAEP read to you. And so for a long time, that is an accommodation in this state that we have used. And so students who had that accommodation were not required to take the NAEP assessment up until 2015. So a big part of that drop. And I think this is important. You know, people have been looking at this for a long time, have said, well, we didn't include enough students for too long. And you can look at that from 13 to 15. But if you stop your analysis there and don't continue to look at 15 to 22, we're missing the bigger picture, which is that it was not a one-time drop. So we have to, there is part of this drop has to do with the inclusion of more students. And a big part of it has to do with overall trends. So I think it's important, I want to be as clear as possible for people who have been following this. I know Dr. Mealy McCarthy and I have talked about this ad nauseum, but want to bring that into the conversation, but also draw attention. There is significant drop beyond that year.
Is there also significant change in literacy instruction as that long-term drop? Is this where we switched over to 3Qing? I mean, is that when that became popular? Is that?
There's a lot of balanced literacy still alive, believe it or not, and that is a real concern because there is absolutely no research, and Dr. Mealy McCarthy can certainly speak to this far better than I, but there is no research to support the effectiveness of this. And
but
so
I know we've been doing it for
there's
quite
a
some
lot
time.
of folks that have been, and we faced the same thing. I need to be honest. In Mississippi, it was popular, and we just said we've got to shift gears. We've got to do what we know works, and then provide the support and the professional development and the materials and all those things that go along with it, because it does work when it's implemented the right way.
Dr. Mealy McCarthy.
So as a little bit of policy history, and I think I'm going to miss some of the details, but when No Child Left Behind came into play, there was a lot of teeth put into that legislation, and there was a lot of kickback about the teeth and a lot of reasons. I don't want to go into those reasons, but at a certain point, there was a disengagement from the No Child Left Behind and the teeth that was associated with it. So in terms of accountability and measuring what counts, a lot of that was pulled back, I think. And so maybe what happened is there was maybe less attention paid to the data and using data-driven decisions, which was a big piece of No Child Left Behind. So I'm thinking that could be a part of it.
You'll remember during that time, Ms. McCusker, we were both teaching then, you still are, right? This is where the shift, right? We see a lot of shift from school level accountability to teacher level accountability. We revamped evaluation systems. You know, our time and energy was focused there and in implementing the Common Core. So we experienced a lot of policy turbulence and not sure, you know, we're seeing the results now as we look back. I want to get to Mr. Crawford.
This was very good. As I've mentioned, and I think the board is well aware, I have dyslexia. So when I graduated high school, I was unable to read. I learned to read during my first year of college at about 22. I remember, I was telling Dr. Michael the other day, I said, I can remember what it was like being in a classroom in elementary school or in Sunday school and not be able to read. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, the thing that we must do is I'm trusting the education experts. I'm not an education expert. I'm trusting the education experts. If this is the right thing to do, then we must draw a line and do it. When I go out to visit the schools, I really enjoy going to the elementary schools, and with the youngest kids, they're running around, they're excited, they're happy. They expect us to do the right thing. What I've been doing over the last 30 or 40 years is around transformation and driving change. What we have to be prepared to do is do what is right, recognizing that it is going, in some circles, it is going to be one of the most unpopular things you could ever do. Right. But we have to, as a board, draw a line that says we will not tolerate this any longer in the state of Maryland. And any administrator, any teacher, any board member, any elected official that doesn't buy in needs to go home. needs to go home. We need to be extraordinarily clear about this, and we have to, what I have found is that organizations spend a lot of time focusing on putting together nice plans. Reads nice, looks good, nicely bound. You can implement a B-level plan, but if you implement it at an A level, you will produce results that'll be remarkable. So my push is that if this is the right thing to do, then we draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we do, and we take all the hits. We've done it before as a board, and we need to do it again on this particular matter, because one thing I love about this board and the leadership at the department is that while we're talking about numbers, the board, the leadership of the department always recognizes we're talking about people. We're talking about setting people up for success, and that starts early. So this is not an academic exercise. Yeah, there are numbers associated with it, but what we're really talking about is setting people up for success for a lifetime. If that is what's at stake, then we have to be prepared to do whatever is necessary to make that happen and to hold everyone, ourselves and everyone else, accountable. And I think, again, as we look at this, the question, just sort of the larger question, I'm not expecting to have it answered here, is if this is what we have to do and the plan seems sound, do we have the resources and the level of support to ensure not only that we have a plan, but the resources to support the teachers, to do all of those things, but to make sure it's actually being done. I mean, make sure it's actually being done. Thank you, Dr. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. You and I had the opportunity to speak, as we do almost every day. And one of the things that we discussed this past week reminded me, came back to the front of my mind as we were hearing Mr. Weaver speak in the video. And that is that we care. We really care, and we care deeply about all of the children in this state. And that is what's driving our focus and our work. We're going to do our best to get it right. We know we're not going to get it perfectly right this round. We're going to engage in a process of continuous improvement as we continue to work through this. But fundamentally, we care, and we're willing to lean in where we need to ensure that we support all children in this state. So thank you for your comments. Are there additional questions for us? Mr. Weaver, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to respond to what Dr. Crawford said briefly. So there have been 2 studies around dyslexia, and that I want to just briefly bring forward. They found, long story short, is that 48% of the incarcerated population in the United States is dyslexic. 48%. Also found that 43% of the self-made millionaires are dyslexic. It depends how we do this and the outcomes for children. There are no throwaway children. The little boy in the screening that you saw, Larry was probably dyslexic. When people see Larry, they say, "Oh, poor Larry, poor," you know. I got news for you. Larry was in a gifted and talented program. He probably was dyslexic. That's why they call dyslexia the MIT disease, because so many people with dyslexia are students at MIT. That's why NASA recruits from there. Yeah. But very briefly, it is possible. It is possible to reach all students. If that's the North Star, then how we're organized really matters. And I'll leave with just one thing to read to you. So this district in Delaware that I was telling you about that was the lowest and then they moved to the highest was an article written and I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from it. It says, "We weren't just a focused school district. We were close to being taken over by the state. Today, we're one of the highest achieving districts in Delaware as measured by the English Language Arts State Test. All subgroups of students, including ELs and students receiving special education services, had impressive gains in student achievement." So sometimes we talk about all students, but we have to operationalize that. If we're really trying to go after all students, then there are some things we got to do. And they may not be uncomfortable, they may not be comfortable or popular, but they're tried and tested things that can be done with good leadership and implementation along the way.
Excellent. Any additional questions or comments, colleagues?
I'd like to.
Please.
I'd
Dr.
like
Burke.
to wrap up or just kind of summarize it. Leadership is a group activity, right? And we really just appreciate your support, your willingness to hear about this bold new policy and approach. And Kareem talked about the checklist and all of the things. And that is the first step. But we do know that action, effective implementation, Dr. Wright would always talk about the right people on the bus. But then she also said the right people need to be on the bus, but also in the right seats. So when we talk about infrastructure, which was something that we realized at our Mississippi Department of Education, we passed this law in 2013. We didn't even have an Office of Early Childhood Education. So that was an office that had to be created. We did not have an Office of Intervention Services to even answer questions about what are the best interventions for students with dyslexia, for English learners. All of those things had to be created. And what we had to do, I'm not sure about Maryland, but in Mississippi, our Department of Education had been seen as an auditing arm. And the only time you see the Department of Education in your building is if you've done something wrong. So we also had to change the perception of the agency. But I would always tell to literacy coaches, even to administrators and teachers, you have to let your work speak for you. And this approach, including boots on the ground supports for teachers, just guidance along the way, and again, just this transparency around what's to come, what has to come, right? What needs to happen in schools. It shows teachers that we not only need our children reading by the end of 3rd grade, but we're going to help you get there. And that has to be the message. So again, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Burke and Mr. Weaver. Thank you. We greatly appreciate you joining us for this rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And tomorrow night, the full viewing of the film will be shown. So we encourage those of you that are here or in the listening area to join us. And I just want to say thank you again for both of you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Kareem, after all this length of time, and always a pleasure to see you again, Kimiana. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Dr. Wright, and that viewing is at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum here in Baltimore.
That is correct. That is correct, in Baltimore.
And couldn't be more fitting, our museum here, Reginald F. Lewis, for African American history. And so delighted that we'll be able to join. So we welcome the public to join. There's registration you can find on our website, 5 to 7 tomorrow.
5 to 7.
Thank you.